Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
The phenomenal rise of aerospace and automotive manufacturing in this region is more than just cars and planes, but underscores the advent of advanced manufacturing. But what does that portend? A central question in this new highly focused industrial sector is it broad-based enough? Could what happened in the hollowing out of Detroit, for example, around cars, happen again? Welcome again. Thanks for joining us on the most widely watched program on Carolina business and public policy. And while the Carolinas build out the aerospace cluster, we will talk to experts about the rewards and about the risks.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review features the topic of aerospace with Deborah Cameron of the South Carolina Council on Competitiveness, Scott Dorney of the North Carolina Military Business Center, Lester D. Eisner from the University of South Carolina, and Penny Whiteheart of NC Aerospace. Now, here's Chris William.
Hello, welcome to our program, Aerospace, Automotive, but ladies, gentlemen, welcome to the program, by the way. Happy summer. Let's start with this idea of the aerospace cluster. Deborah, I'll start with you since you're kind of closest here. Deborah, do you think the aerospace business, and right now we have the Boeing effect and, the halo effect of that huge announcement now a couple of years ago, but do you think the aerospace cluster would be nearly as developed as it is if it had not been for the automotive footprint in South Carolina and North Carolina, actually?
It's a great question, and it's one that we actually asked our researcher to look at last year to make some analogies and see if there's any synergies between the automotive sector and aerospace. And because we had that same wondering, I think the skill set that is obviously developed in the state is there and will assist the development of the aerospace industry. But what our researcher found out is that since Boeing's arrival in South Carolina in 2009, the aerospace cluster has generated approximately the same number of jobs as the automotive sector did after BMW's arrival in the state from between 1990 and 2007. So the aerospace industry is already showing that it has the potential to become a pillar similar to the automotive industry in probably both of the Carolinas.
Yeah, in central North Carolina, Penny, do you get that same sense?
Definitely, Chris. And I think one of the things that we'd like people to understand about aerospace is that the jobs that are supporting aerospace manufacturing are simply advanced manufacturing jobs. Welders, machinists, assemblers, quality inspectors, and I think both states already had a very strong infrastructure for training and delivering that workforce, and that could be another reason for the very dramatic growth that the states have seen over the last couple of years.
Lester, Scott, weigh in on this. How do you feel?
I would agree that there's similarities, but I would also argue that you need to define what aerospace is. And I'll use the Dreamliner as an example. The Dreamliner is only about 50% hardware, which will drive it towards the manufacturing side. The other 50% are navigation systems, communication systems, and software. About 25 to 30% of a modern aerospace device, manned or unmanned, is software. And so where BMW or Volvo or some of the automotive industries, a large percentage of theirs is manufacturing and getting that vehicle off the assembly line. the complexity of autonomous next generation air traffic control systems drives aerospace to a really broader spectrum. And so if you have the manufacturing skills, you can certainly build upon those. But the opportunities to expand beyond that into computer engineering, software integration, and stuff like that, innovative small businesses that can feed that, become huge. The challenge becomes, how do you maintain workforce development in a very, very diverse area? You know, the aerospace industry is reshaping itself. If you read, as I'm sure we all have, recent professional publications, there's a new acronym called GAFA. What the heck's GAFA mean? It stands for Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon. They've invested billions of dollars in SpaceX and the aerospace industry. And so how do we look at the full plate of skill sets to get a manned aircraft in the air, an unmanned aircraft in the air? I think the opportunities are huge.
Well, and so, not to interrupt you there, General, but I do want to get to, you bring up a good point. So, Scott, in North Carolina, and not just in North Carolina, but you know, with your military background, are we talking about getting more than just commercial airliners off the ground here? Are we talking about SpaceX?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what I wanted to mention, is the scope of this industry is so huge. Of course, we love having Boeing in the region. It's great. But for us, particularly in North Carolina, MRO operations, maintenance, repair, and overhaul operations, both military and civilian, production of components and repair parts for the aerospace industry is so important. And one thing that I think is important on the workforce, and certainly our community colleges are filling critical role in teaching current skills to that workforce, but our traditional manufacturing workforce in the transition from legacy industries to aerospace is one reason why that industry is so successful in our two states.
Because it's, you know, let me back up and let me say, CEO after CEO will come on this experts will come on this program and say, yeah, but you know, it's the skills gap, it's the workers' skills gap. We don't have the people to do the software, to do the more advanced manufacturing body. Do you see that as being a tipping point in the growth and development of this business? Anyone?
Well, it's definitely a deficiency, and I'd say a lot of the efforts in North and South Carolina to support and grow aerospace have been in workforce development and making sure that there is alignment between these job openings. I looked this morning, there are more than 1,500 jobs open in North Carolina in aviation and aerospace right now.
Really?
And these are advanced manufacturing like we talked about, but also finance, procurement, project management.
But I'm sorry, Penny, but yet the rate of unemployment in North Carolina is at least it's ticked up.
It's going up and down. It's not quite at full employment. So obviously there's a lot of opportunity to move people into these jobs. And Chris, I'd say while we have been happy with our employment growth, the wage growth hasn't been what we have experienced in prior years. And aviation and aerospace is a very high-paying industry. In manufacturing, aviation and aerospace usually pays twice what average manufacturing jobs pay. And so that's why it's a public policy priority to invest and support this industry.
And I think the workforce challenge is not just something that's happening in the Carolinas. I think that's a nationwide issue that every state is struggling with, about how do we get the pipeline of talent trained that the industry is going to demand. And on Penny's point about the salary, our study last year showed that the average total compensation level for an aerospace worker in South Carolina was $70,000, which is significantly higher. I think the average manufacturing wage in South Carolina is a little under $50,000. So these are the kind of high skill, high talent, knowledge type of jobs that will help the state's economies improve and grow.
Yeah, the state's legislative session, at least in South Carolina, is over, except for the flag controversy that certainly has come to an end there. Has there been adequate dialogue, or has been indifferent dialogue about that has helped? And of course, it's got to be one of the longest sessions in North Carolina legislatively. But have you been encouraged, concerned, or really indifferent about any of the legislative dialogue that's gone on specific to aerospace?
Well, I think one thing that's encouraging is the commitment to education. I think that we've seen it in North Carolina in the General Assembly. Of course, there are different varying opinions between the parties and how those education dollars should be spent, but we've seen increased investment in education in North Carolina. To address your point about the skills gap, even because the skills evolve faster than a lot of our educational institutions can keep up. So what we've seen in the aerospace industry, in the solar industry, energy industry, renewable energy, and others, the pace of development is so fast, it's difficult. Even when we get highly skilled, highly educated, and trained folks out of the military, which is a very, very important element of our workforce in North Carolina, they're highly skilled, but to be able to have a comprehensive set of skills, the community colleges, our university systems have to step in, and being current on the requirements of industry is really the challenge.
But Lester, I want to come back to you and ask you this question. Specifically, did the South Carolina legislative session in 2015, do you feel like there was a direct addressing of any sort other than the $120 million infrastructure money that is going to go to help the Boeing site? But was there anything encouraging come out of that dialogue?
Absolutely. Even prior to the legislative session, the Carolinas in general and South Carolina specific have done a pretty good job of doing their homework. Economic impact studies, strategic plans targeted towards aerospace. And you just discuss CEOs come on this show and discuss the concerns about workforce development. Well, and that's a valid question and concern. But as the aerospace industry reshapes itself, 20% of the U.S. aerospace industry is coming to the southeastern United States. And so obviously they see...
And how big's that industry?
Well, right now the U.S. aerospace industry employs just under 1 million people. And in 2015, they're going to hire another 55,000 people in the industry. Well, 20% of that stuff is coming here. Well, you start looking at the Carolinas, and I can't quote North Carolina statistics, but they're similar, is we've had about 11.9% growth in aerospace sector, and the aerospace sector as a whole was the largest exports sector in the U.S. And you can really argue that the aerospace sector kind of pulled us out of the Great Recession that we just went through. And so, to answer your question in a long-winded fashion, the state legislators are keenly aware of the potential and possibility. Now, there's always in government, there's always a lag between, as Scott was saying, between the need shows up and when we fix our educational system. Sure. But there's huge investment in STEM education and the technical college education in the academic institution. As an example, we have a lot of supportive leadership from the governor, from the state legislators, of supporting all the academic institutions. And what are we leveraging? How do we leverage the technology and the training coming out of those schools? We have the Ronald McNair Aerospace Institute at the University of South Carolina, which is broad spectrum, advanced composite research, repairs, how do you weave complex structures? How do we teach those kids how to do that? Linked to the original equipment manufacturers. So there's a lot of synergy. The Secretary of Commerce that's a weekly discussion with him on not only about Boeing, about MRO, about the Lockheed Martins. One of the other areas in aerospace is the emphasis on small to medium-sized companies that feed into the larger companies because they have flexibility, the adaptability, and whether it's precision machining or whether it's repair and MRO, is how do we feed that? Recently, the state legislature, they were able to sustain some tax incentives for folks in the MRO business. So without that knowledge and folks like Deborah and her job as the Council on Competitiveness to have a daily dialogue, we wouldn't get that. So there's a lot of awareness.
Well, okay. Well, let me just quickly come to you because I want you to do this in 30 seconds, if at all possible. Right. Just because I know there's a lot of you're trying to get 10 pounds of information in a 5-pound bag. So, Penny, clearly South Carolina has leaned into the aerospace industry. Legislators are on board. Policy seems to be leaning that way. Can North Carolina do it, given the debate that's gone on in North Carolina around education and infrastructure and some social issues that have kind of creeped into the legislative issue? Do you feel like North Carolina can even talk about developing this industry?
Certainly.
In a policy way?
Certainly. And I think those kinds of political distractions are there every year and for any industry that we look at. I want to remind you we were first in flight. We're very proud of the aviation
You know,
history.
Ohio has a real problem
There's
with that,
no
right?
one from Ohio in our panel today.
But they're watching. Stay with us for a second here. Next week on this program, coming up on the program, we've got both superintendents of education in North and South Carolina will be here. That's always an interesting dialogue. And also very soon, Tom Ross is the president of the UNC system, the University of North Carolina system, and he will also be here on this program. Do you think it is too early? It is certainly morning in aerospace development and that industry and industrial sector. Deborah, do you think it is too early, and especially in South Carolina, to start planning for what happens when that industry, it was, as you said, General, it was the first one you could argue that was leading us out of the recession. But what happened in Detroit is a cautionary tale. How does South Carolina make sure that they're not at risk to have so much in an industrial sector that could hurt?
Well, I think, you know, when you look at South Carolina's economy, the key is having that diversity. And with the automotive, with the aerospace, with tourism, with technology, the technology sector that we see emerging in South Carolina, the insurance sector, the financial sector, I think, you know, Bobby Hitt's mission is always to maintain making sure that we have a diverse economy, so that if one part of it goes down, you know, the ship doesn't sink, that we stay afloat. And I think aerospace, in terms of the GDP contribution to the state economy now in South Carolina, aerospace is around 5 or 6%, which, you know, isn't exorbitant, but that is a significant contribution.
In 5 years, could that be a double? Could that be 10 or 12 or 15%?
We do hope that it will be, and we're aspirational in our vision for where we would like the sector to go. So yes, I think that is important.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the suppliers, and I think that diversification is evident when you look at the supply chain. And most of the companies in North Carolina that are supplying into aerospace, it isn't 100% of their business. They're also in automotive and
medical,
energy, other transportation, even railroad cars are transferable for the contract manufacturers and suppliers that really are what I think we're talking about developing. We're probably not going to recruit another Boeing to the southeastern United States, but we're going to develop that industry. We're going to support and connect the ones that are here, hopefully attracting more. And I don't think the danger is there.
I don't know.
To that point, in North Carolina, I know, to the point on small businesses, our challenge is getting more of these small businesses to get part of their business focused on the aerospace market and the government aerospace market. Lockheed Martin's got 100 suppliers in our state for the F-35 strike fighter. Boeing's got 200 suppliers and almost $700 million a year in suppliers and contractors in North Carolina. Most of those companies are not specifically working for those companies. They're not specifically working for our government military MRO operations, but part of their activities are committed to that industry. And making sure that small businesses understand that they have a viable opportunity within the aerospace market, be it on the commercial side or the military side, is absolutely critical. And that's what we're doing in North Carolina, and I think in South Carolina, is spreading that message of diversity and engagement, get these small businesses into this market.
You think it's that simple, just making sure that small businesses know that they have a place at the table?
I think education's huge. Educating the businesses on not only the opportunity, but the process is absolutely critical.
And the global market as well. Les mentioned the export opportunity. And so domestically, there's opportunity here in the Southeast, and then ultimately as an export opportunity. There's tremendous potential in aerospace.
The education part, agree 100% everything's been said. But I was in a discussion in another state that's headlong into the aerospace industry in the Southeast, and one of the senior execs made the comment, the first thing we had to find out is we had to educate the educators. And that's to get out the word. It's kind of like the question you asked earlier with the state legislators. Honorable South Carolinians, North Carolinians, they want to do good things for their state and the communities. But you've got to make sure they understand intuitively what are the legislative acts they need to do, what are the education changes we need to do, how do we leverage that, how do we partner across the three pillars of industry, government, and academia, and how do we leverage that? And so it's more than just changing a curriculum and going, okay, I finished that, is how do I change it another 5 years? And so I think we're doing a pretty good job. I think it's a work in progress. I think we are at an area where we're going to see aerospace exponentially expand, and it may be bigger than Boeing. It could be, there's a small company in Charleston, as an example, that makes remote controlled helicopters for the media and other. They have a payload of about
these drones or these
drones.
choppers.
And so that's a spectrum of aerospace. So from micro UAVs all the way to large manned airplanes, the Carolinas are poised to really be engaged in that.
Yeah.
466 companies in South Carolina that are aerospace related companies. 70% or so of those are small companies. Well, the challenge and the opportunity, the challenge is how do we feed and nurture and grow those small companies so they can turn into medium or larger companies. And the opportunity is they have a lot of flexibility. They have a lot of, on the government side. And so we're poised, if we leverage all the opportunities we have in this part of the country, you're going to see aerospace creeping up rapidly in the gross state product.
Of its share of GSP for South Carolina, certainly North Carolina.
And to Les's point, I think organizations like Penny and I's, the role that we play is convening what we call the aerospace support chain members, everything from K through 12 educators to higher ed folks to other folks that are interested in nurturing the growing industry so that they understand what their role in the process could be and we can look for ways to collaborate. And on the other hand, we convene the industries themselves so that we can be the feedback mechanism for the industry directly to that support chain.
There seems like, this is just me thinking this, but there seems like, there's another sector in the Carolinas that has been around and looking for a way to get some traction, and that's the alternative energy sector. And it would seem like there is some connectivity here. Now, is there a stretch to that, or would 1 + 1 = 3 in the case if aerospace and alternate energy figured out a way to work closely together?
Well, I think there is opportunity for that across many sectors, and those two in particular. When you look at composites, when you look at electronics and advanced manufacturing techniques that are similar across those industries. Look at the motorsports industry. I was in Richmond this week with the Defense Logistics Agency, and they could not stop talking about United Protective Technologies in Locust, North Carolina, that makes the windshield tear-offs for NASCAR. They use them on helicopters in the desert to keep the windshields from being damaged by sand. It's these types of opportunities. It's crossover between industry. And let's not forget about the sustainment opportunities. We focus on new aircraft production, but it's another huge market, particularly on the government side, as we have to extend the service life of a lot of these aircraft platforms. It's going to present a lot of opportunity for long-term contracts for small businesses in that sustainment market across industry.
But Chris, I'll admit there are some challenges in doing this. It's not easy, and aerospace is a very rigorous sector to participate in. And I'd say a lot of the work for these small and medium-sized manufacturers is getting them focused on some quality standards and certifications that are going to be required for them to truly supply into aviation and aerospace. And so we have some programs that we've deployed to raise awareness of these certifications. There is some support out there, economic development agencies and industrial extension agencies that are working to raise quality, I guess, in our manufacturers. So there are some challenges, and I'd say some work to do in each of our states to bring more suppliers.
We literally have about a minute and a half left, and so thanks for that segue. That's awfully nice, Penny. So what is the Achilles heel? I mean, what could really take off the rails the momentum that aerospace has? Anyone?
I really don't see anything that's going to stop the growth of this industry. I mean, when you look at the major OEMs like Boeing and Airbus, they're predicting over the next 20 years up to 40,000 new aircraft needed. Unless something really major happens to the global economy, I don't see a big curveball coming.
And I'm not talking about just the global economy in aerospace. I'm talking about the Carolinas' interest.
The Achilles heel, and I don't think either one of the Carolinas are going down this road. The Achilles heel would be if you myopically looked at just one specific segment of aerospace and specialized in that. If to Scott's point or Deborah, if you look at the full spectrum of what aerospace is, whether it's maintenance, repair, and overhaul, whether it's legacy airplanes, whether it's new Dreamliners, whether it's software integration, whether it's navigation systems, whether it's plastic film over a windshield, if you look at the full capability and have that capability, then you're going to be okay. You're going to be on the train as it gets out of the station.
That's going to be the last word, General. Thank you. We're out of time. Nicely done. And I can tell that there's no excitement at all about the industry here. I hope y'all find that faith, if you will. And I'm kidding. Thank you for being on the program.
Sure,
good to see you all.
Yeah.
Thanks for making the trip.
It was enjoyable. Thank
Thank you for watching our program. You have any comments or questions, carolinabusinessreview.org. Have a good weekend. Until next week. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.